Councillor Werner, we are now live on YouTube. If you'd like to go ahead and start meeting, please.
Thank you very much, Owen. Welcome to this online meeting of the Councillors Standards Panel on Monday, the 9th of December 2024. My name is Councillor Simon Werner and I'll be chairing this meeting. This meeting's being held virtually via Zoom and streamed live to the public on YouTube. I remind all attendees that participation in the meeting indicates consent to the audio and video being streamed live and acknowledgement that after the meeting it will continue to be available in the public domain. It is important that all participants recognise that meeting remotely requires a different approach than a meeting in person. Firstly, it will be useful if all panel members and officers could introduce themselves so the public are aware who is in this meeting and the role they are undertaking. So I'm Simon Werner and I'm leader of the council and chairman of this panel. Catherine.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Catherine Del Campo, lead member for Adults, Health and Housing and a member of this panel.
Thank you. Clive?
Yeah, Clive Baskerville, a member for Pinckney's Green and a member of this panel.
Gertch?
Yeah, hi, Gertch Singh. Yeah, I'm a member for St Mary's and also a member of this panel. Thank you.
And Carol?
Carol Da Costa. I don't know if I'm a member or not. I just saw it in my diary, so I came.
Yeah, you're a member.
A member of this panel. So.
Yeah. And then I've got from the officers, I've got Owen.
Morning, everybody. Owen Brown, the Governance and Democratic Services Manager, and Clark to the panel.
And Elaine.
Hi, Elaine Brown. I am the Deputy Director of Law and Governance, and I'm also the Council's Monitoring Officer.
Excellent. Okay, so we'll now start on the agenda items. Do we have any apologies for absence?
I have received no apologies, Chair. We've got a couple of members who are not present. They might just be running a bit late, but I will let you know as and when if they join.
Okay.
I think Wisdom's just about to join us.
Perfect.
Okay. Fantastic. And then we have declarations of interest. No declarations of interest. And minutes of the last meeting, are we happy with them?
Yeah, agreed.
Excellent. Right. Now, Elaine, Monitoring Officer's annual report. Over to
Hi,
you.
thank you. First of all, can I apologise? You'll realise when you agreed the minutes of the last meeting, unfortunately, there wasn't a meeting for Code of Conduct complaints for 2022-2023. There was a changeover in monitoring officers and unfortunately it got missed, so I can only apologise for that. However, we have included the numbers for that particular financial year in this report. Also, you will note that this report is for the financial year 2023-2024, and again, we are having it rather late in the year, so again, I can apologise for that. However, we have now included this meeting into the annual programme of meetings that will be decided in January 2025 at full council. So it's in the programme of meetings, and I believe the next meeting will be the 30th of June 2025. So we will be having this regularly. It's very important to monitor councillor standards and the number of complaints that we have. So this is the annual report on council standards. Before I get into the details set out in the report, does anybody have any questions?
Yeah.
Any questions? Yeah, go on, Gertch.
I do, but I was gonna ask questions sort of after your report, if that's all right. I think.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah. I just wondered if there was anything. Yeah, that before I get into the detail, but if it's on the detail, that's fine. I can take questions at any time if you just put your hand up.
Thanks, Lane.
The function. Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Singh. So, as it states in the report, we have a legal duty to have in place arrangements that deal with Code of Conduct complaints, not just for RBWM as a principal authority, but also for parish councils. And we do training. We had training when there was the new cohort of councillors. We are probably due some training. However, you will see when I get into the numbers, we've actually had a reduction in the number of complaints, which is really good to see. Now, again, I said this is for the financial year 2023-2024, and the current financial year that will be reported in June. So in the table set out in paragraph 2.7 of the report, you'll see that for RBWM complaints, we've had a total of 12 complaints. No breach was found in any of those, and actually one of them was withdrawn, because sometimes if there is a complaint made, if it looks as though there could be a resolution with the complainant, and perhaps I can speak to the councillor involved and I can ask them to tender an apology, then that's something we'll do. And that's what happened in this case. So that was a really good outcome, that actually a complaint was made. I spoke to the councillor involved and the complaint was actually withdrawn. Rather worryingly, you'll see there are actually there's quite a large number of parish council complaints. 13 of those, there was no breach found. One of them, it went on for further investigation. Now, in that particular case, during the initial assessment phase, there wasn't quite enough evidence, and it did look as though there could have been a serious breach of the code, depending on the evidence. So we did a light touch investigation, and that's concluded, and it was found that we considered there was no breach and no further action. So in that financial year, in 2020, 2023, 2024, we actually had no investigations completed. And there were no investigations in the previous financial year as well.
Okay.
When it comes on to numbers, if you look at paragraph 2.8 in the report, you'll see there's a staggering number. In 2021, 2022, there were 79 complaints against RBWM councillors, which when the previous monitoring officer, Emma Duncan, did her previous report for the minutes you've just agreed, she explained that was an extremely high number, and it was of great concern. And it was something that was actually mentioned in one of the peer reviews. There was an awful lot of councillor on councillor tit for tat complaint making. And I have to say congratulations to Emma Duncan, the previous monitoring officer, because she did a lot of work in getting that under control. So I'd like to thank her for doing that, because you'll see for the RBWM complaints in 2022-2023, it reduced significantly to 17. So from 79 to 17 is quite a significant reduction. And then I'm pleased to say that in 2023-2024, that's been reduced again, and it's only 12 complaints. So, although people can make complaints without grounds, I think it's just a really good sign that we're getting less complaints. It just shows a real adherence, and, obviously, whatever Emma put some work in place, there was a lot of issues around complaints on social media, and some training was provided, and you can see that's definitely had an effect on the number of complaints. But one of my areas of concern, as you can see, is parish councils. So in 2021-22, we had 4 complaints. That was reduced to 1 complaint for the whole year in 2022-2023. And unfortunately, in the financial year 23-24, that has gone up to 14 complaints. So it is, that is quite a concern. And it seems to, out of these, 9 of them came from one parish council, and 4 of them came from another parish council. So we only have 14 parish councils. So that is when I've been speaking with other monitoring officers, especially the Berkshire monitoring officers, that is a really high number of complaints for parish councils, especially as 14 of those complaints came from 2 parish councils.
So which 2?
I can't name them because they haven't actually gone on to further action, but I can't name them in the public domain.
No, not the people. Not the people, but which parishes?
I probably shouldn't name those in the public. I don't want to cause further issues within those parishes, but I think the issue is there just appears to be a breakdown in relationships, and in both cases I actually spoke to the clerks and I've offered them advice that I do think rather than, I don't think code of conduct complaints were necessarily the correct way of dealing with these issues within parish councils. And I have advised the clerk that I think mediation would be a good idea, because sometimes it doesn't necessarily help when complaints are made. The actual outcome and the sanctions available are not necessarily the right way of resolving difficult relationships within parish councils. So I have advised mediation, and although this report is for 2023, 2024, I would say there are other issues in the current financial year relating to parish council. So I'm not quite sure why, but there is an issue. And my role as monitoring officer at RBWM, I only have jurisdiction to deal with code of conduct complaints. It's not my role to go in and deal with the governance issues in the parish councils. We do try and assist clerks where we can, but we can't become overly involved. We don't have jurisdiction to do so. As I said, we only deal with code of conduct complaints, and we also deal with the registration of parish councils' interests. I don't know if anyone's got any questions before I go on to learning points.
Clive.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
I just wondered, with regards to complaints, how many of these people that have put in the complaints have done the training, particularly parish councils, and do they understand the nature of what a complaint should be? Because I can't help feeling some of these complaints are probably, as you say, tit for tat or even vexatious. And the fact that there's been a whole new group of councillors in the last year or so suggests that I don't know if it suggests they're either gone to the training or just better behaved. I don't know. Have you got a theory on that?
Well, the thing is, it's a mixture. So there are some of the complainants are other councillors, but actually the majority of complainants are members of the public rather than other councillors. I know that there was an issue in previous years with councillors making code of conduct complaints against other councillors, but that's definitely dropped off. So, and I know the previous monitoring officer did a lot of work on that. And I think she obviously did a very good job, because we've definitely seen a drop in that. And a lot of the complaints now are actually from members of the public rather than other councillors. So unfortunately, there's not training as such for members of the public, but maybe we could look at making it more clear on our website how complaints are dealt with, because certainly, some of the parish work we've done, we've had people contacting us saying, they think a councillor should be, they want them to stop being a councillor. They think that they should be suspended from being a councillor. And that's not one of the sanctions offered, certainly not in England. In Wales, it is slightly different, but that's not a sanction. It would have to be a very serious breach in any event. But I think there is possibly a slight lack of understanding from members of the public as to what sanctions are actually available for a breach of the code. There's been, over time, there's been a real change to the code of conduct. There used to be a central government department that dealt with, it was a quasi government department, the Standards Board for England. That's all changed. And I think really that the teeth that the code may have had once has definitely reduced. So, it might be worthwhile as maybe strengthening that so that members of the public are aware what sanctions are available. The threshold for finding a breach or carrying out a further investigation, it has to be quite high. It has to be in the public interest. And you'll see in the report under the section financial, implications, that there's a considerable cost if we have to carry out an investigation. So, it would have to be a serious potential breach before we spend public money carrying out an investigation. That's not to say we wouldn't, of course. We do an initial sift, and if we think there are grounds to carry out a further investigation, then we would do so. But it's a very good question, Councillor Baskerville, but I think there's definitely been a drop in councillor on councillor complaints.
I've got Gertch.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. Yeah, thanks for that, Elaine. My initial thoughts just so far, just looking at the report, is this is quite a good report actually. In terms of RBWM, complaints have gone down massively. And Emma Duncan, yes, she did a great job.
Yeah.
As have you yourself taken on the stewardship of monitoring officer, that should be congratulated. We had a huge amount of complaints previously, RBWM councillor and councillor. There was a culture at the top of the council, right up from the council leader, which we know was responsible for a significant amount of bullying claims against him, it's been reported in the press, so there's no need to hide from that. So and coming into this new administration, I think the council leaders, all the leaders, the leader and across the groups should be congratulated on the way that they've dealt with their groups and their own personal behaviour, which should be commendable, and it's demonstrated with the reduction in councillor and councillor code of conduct complaints, where the system was previously weaponised, costing us a considerable amount of money as a borough to investigate. And not only that, also the junior members that were having code of conduct complaints put against them, it was affecting them massively, mental health issues, and the people who I was speaking to very, very withdrawn from the political process. So that didn't help us at all. So I think that's all should be congratulated. The other thing I just want to say is I am concerned about the increase in complaints at parish level, which you've highlighted, and I just want to know more about how we maybe if we can have a shift in focus from RBWM and move resources towards these two areas of concern, where the local parishes are engaging in this code of conduct process. There is issues there, and I don't know how you're getting on with your training and mediation in terms of that with the parishes.
Thanks for your question, and you're correct. And you know, when you said earlier that councillor behaviour isn't just a monitoring officer issue, it's also an issue for group leaders. And you know, I think that's a very good point that you made. Coming on to parish councils, again, I mentioned earlier, you know, we deal with code of conduct complaints for parishes. We also are responsible for the registration of interest. Unfortunately, we don't have resource. We don't necessarily have jurisdiction to go into parish councils and deal with any governance issues that they have. I mean, if we had excess resource, I'm sure we would obviously offer to help, maybe offer some training. Unfortunately, and I hate to mention this, we hear this in many council meetings at the moment, it is just down to officer capacity. You know, we just don't have that capacity, but you know, it is something I have been thinking about, and I have been looking into perhaps external resources that I could perhaps signpost parish councils to in terms of training. I believe most, not necessarily all, parish councils now have adopted the LGA code, and the LGA itself offers lots of really good training. It offers very good guidance, but actually what I'm seeing in parishes, it's more of it's a difficult issue. It tends to be not so much people make code of conduct complaints, but I think it's more down to relationships with individuals and difficulties with relationships. And I'm not sure that the code of conduct process, and not in all cases, but in many cases, I think you said earlier about weaponising of the code of conduct. And I'm not necessarily saying that's the case in parish councils, but I do think perhaps there's a slight misuse in certain cases where there's relationship issues, and then people are trying to use the code of conduct to sort of highlight those, but it's probably not, it's not the best resolution. And that's why to some of the clerks, I have suggested mediation. But yeah, I am looking at signposting to external resources, just purely because, you know, myself and other members of the legal team who might assist with code of conduct issues. We just simply don't have capacity to help parish councils, and it's quite hard as well because we're such a small team. If you get drawn into it, if you get too close to parish councils, we are then the people that have to deal with the code of conduct complaints. So there can be that conflict of interest. So where there are lots of complaints coming from a particular parish council, we will try and help the clerks to resolve those. But again, we have to be quite careful with that.
Okay, that's a fair comment. Thank you very much.
I've got Catherine now.
Thank you. I think you've probably covered most of what I was going to ask of, particularly around the parish councils. I was going to say, you know, there seem to be problems not just in these two parish councils, but outside the borough. You know, I talked to other people involved in local politics, and I don't know what's going on, but you know, there seem to be problems, you know, up and down the country, and you know, maybe it is to do with, you know, boroughs being really stretched, as you've mentioned. But the LGA are really good, and so I'm glad to hear that they can offer support, because you know, that's an excellent resource that's available to us, and a lot of the support you can get is free of charge. So I'd really encourage people to you know, to take that up. On the code of conducts, you know, obviously it's really good to see that those numbers have come down. Agree with what Councillor Singh said about you know, culture. I think previously we've had a bit of sort of granularity on, you know, where the complaints come from and who they're against, and I know that's probably a little bit more difficult when you've got a smaller number. It's maybe easier to identify people, but that was really useful, I think, you know, particularly in that year where we had so many, for group leaders, because they could see, you know, where are these complaints emanating from? Okay, do I need to go talk to my group about that? And where are they going to? You know, so group leaders on the other side of the complaint, you know, do I need to speak to my group about, you know, not, you know, certain changes you can make that will, you know, reduce your chance. So I think that was really useful data. Is it possible to get a little bit more granularity, or is it that reason that there's so few?
Yeah, so I was going to mention this actually. So yes, you're correct. So we used to record the complaints and also the complainant, if the complainant was a councillor, by political group. We don't record that data anymore because I think I mentioned earlier the sort of tit for tat by, you know, councillor on councillor complaints from different political groups. It really has dropped off, and it is now mainly, the majority of complaints are from members of the public. So we haven't, I mean, we will monitor that. If it does become an issue, I think we would go back into collecting that data. And as you said, with a much smaller data set, it is more difficult. And as well, I think the reason we collected it on a larger data set was it showed patterns. And the thing is, as you've seen, out of all of the complaints, both in the last financial year and the one before that, none of the complaints went on for further investigation. They were all no further action. And again, it could give some false narrative, because sometimes complaints are made and they are baseless. They have no, and when they are dealt with at the initial stage, the initial assessment stage, that is completely confidential. That we wouldn't, if somebody did an FOI, that would generally never be released. Obviously, depending on, we would have to apply any relevant exemptions, but usually they would not be released into the public domain. It's only when a complaint has gone through the full investigative process and a breach has been found and it comes to the standards panel, that is when things would start going into the public domain. So you have to be careful, because it could set hairs running mentioning political groups with smaller data sets. But I agree, if there becomes an issue with tit for tat complaints, councillor on councillor, we will certainly start recording that data and we will put it in future reports. So thanks, that's a really good question.
Okay, Clive.
Yeah, I'm still live, aren't I?
Yeah.
You can still hear. Yeah. Yeah, just following on from that point, I think with those 79 complaints, I think there's a danger that one or two people were probably serial complainers. And I think that's really down to the internal discipline of each party to try and sort those people out. Because the danger to me is that, they become like crying wolf, that if they complain 8 times, for instance, you get a 9th complaint, people are just going to say, oh, not that person again. And they might actually ignore that complaint or not give it as much credence because they're serial complainers. And I think if you've got the internal discipline there, then and also the training, then I think that the amount of complaints will drop, which is what's happened, will drop dramatically. And I think that, as somebody's mentioned, there was possibly a culture of bullying, and that they used these complaints as a form of this bullying, an extension of it, if you like. And that the fact that it's dropped dramatically suggests that there's a different culture there now.
Elaine?
Thank you. Thanks. So if I go on to the next part of the report, which is lessons learned from the complaints, and the majority of complaints in 2023-24, they actually related to behaviour of councillors during council meetings. And when I've looked into this, and I've discussed it with the group leaders as well, it is really important, and it's hard. Councillors, obviously, as politicians, you're allowed to express your views, but really, I always just urge councillors just to consider how their behaviour during meetings has an impact, on how members of the public view councillors, and also the whole council, the council as a whole, how the council as a whole is perceived based on members of the public watching councillors in public meetings. And as you'll be aware, our meetings are live streamed and they're also held on YouTube. So again, it's really important, with poor behaviour in meetings, that can be viewed, and it's there really on YouTube for all to see. So it's just something which all of us just need to remind all councillors to just be very aware of how their behaviour can be perceived. The other common theme, I'd say the secondary theme, was social media. And again, I'm always saying to councillors, just, be really careful when you're posting on social media, because again, once you post something, it's there for all people to see, and things can be interpreted in different ways. And, sometimes you see, interactions with councillors and residents. I always just try and remind councillors just to be really mindful when posting on social media. So, really, if we can all just sort of bear that in mind. And again, this was one of the biggest themes that the previous monitoring officer saw in 2021-2022, when we had 79 complaints. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not just for the monitoring officer, but group leaders. She did a lot of work with the group leaders, and I think this is what reduced the number of complaints, especially relating to social media. So if, we haven't got a huge issue looking at the number of complaints in the last financial year. However, if that does become a problem, that is something I would raise with group leaders.
I've got Carol.
Thank you. I just really wanted to make a comment about the behaviour in council, because I do think we still have some councillors whose behaviour in council meetings is less than I would expect to be a gold standard. And actually, we're elected members. We have to think about the words we use before we use them. As you say, because that is going out live and it's recorded forever. And I still have concerns about some of the behaviours. And although I personally wouldn't take a code of conduct out against somebody in that scenario, I do think some of it is worthy of code of conduct, and I'd like to know what's happening. And I think we all know that there's not many, but there are a few regular culprits, and just wondered what is happening with those individuals. Are they being tutored behind the scenes as to what is appropriate and what isn't? Or do we have to go down the road of code of conduct to get them to behave in a better way.
Yeah, if I can come in there as well, it's the I'm particularly noticing that a couple of members are really challenging the mayor's decisions. So the mayor would make a decision at the from the top table at the council meeting, and then they'll then follow a sort of basically an argument between the mayor and, I've been in opposition. You can have a bit of a but when the mayor makes a decision, you stop arguing. And that doesn't seem to be happening. So it'd be interesting your view on that side of it. Is that a code of conduct? Is that something that there can be some sort of education for that particular councillor? What's your view, Elaine?
Thanks for that, Councillor Da Costa and Councillor Werner. I think I mentioned before that the threshold can be quite high. It's not to say we don't take member conduct seriously, but in terms of how we deal with complaints, taking things on further and going to a standards panel, generally the conduct would have to be quite serious. However, I will speak to individual members behind the scenes, and I also would speak to group leaders. And I have, recently in the past spoken to people if I believe people in their group have misbehaved during meetings. And I will often try and deal with that, informally, maybe by way of an apology. But incidents, and I always make this clear, if I'm doing an initial assessment decision, even where I'm saying there's no further action, I will always make it clear that behaviour and its impact and whether it breaches the code, it can have a cumulative effect. So you might have incidences where there's one very serious incident that would be a serious breach of the code, and we would investigate, we would take it to the council standards panel. But actually, I always remind members that it could be lots of low-level incidents that could sort of reach that threshold, not necessarily through the seriousness, but through the sheer number. So I do always try and remind that, when I'm speaking to councillors, that behaviour is not just one-off incidents. It can be your overall behaviour. So, where there have been incidences where people might have been rude to other councillors in the council chamber, I will remind councillors that their behaviour is always noted, and even if no further action is taken, if a complaint is made, that's not necessarily the end of it. But I do think, again, as I've mentioned throughout today's meeting, it really is for group leaders to be involved in that and to have discussions with their own members. Obviously to work in conjunction with myself.
Carol, of course, your group leader is your own husband, so that makes anything like that difficult.
Well, I'd hope that I'm not a regular culprit. So I just also think that it's worth saying, if we're going to talk to some of these naughty members, that actually they reduce their own credibility. Because once you start becoming habitual in this kind of behaviour, I know for me, even though I won't do it physically, in your head, the eyes roll up and you think, oh, here we go again. Because you know that it's the same old people doing the same offences, and it does start to reduce that person's credibility. And it's difficult if they have a high office position, because then their credibility is diminished and it's very hard to take them seriously.
Thanks, Councillor Da Costa. Yeah, I mean, I always do urge people to watch meetings back, and again, as I said, they're all streamed, they're all available on YouTube. So, I do sometimes say to people, just watch the meeting back and see what you think.
Okay, I can't see any other hands
We've got
up.
Wisdom's hand up.
Oh, sorry, Wisdom,
Councillor
didn't see yours. Go ahead, Wisdom.
Yeah, I took the chance of making it a brown hand rather than a white hand or a yellow hand. Didn't want to be too Homer Simpson-like. Yeah, listen, if somebody complained about Carol, I would receive the complaint, Simon. There wouldn't be an issue, although you're more likely to get, Carol's more likely to get a complaint about me, I think. Look, just generally, I think just the point Carol's raising is that we seem to be slipping back into old patterns of behaviour. Not very much, just our toes in the water, but we don't want it to be a slippery slope. So we're starting to see people slagging off residents, slagging off other council members, and we're all here to do a good job, even the residents. So her question was well made. Is this something, Elaine, that you're dealing with quietly behind the scene? One question, and then the second question, which I just want to come back to, is we are seeing again. I think you see it when a group's been in power for a long time, and they've got obviously most groups have a big majority. You see a slight change in behaviour, and I have to say that the Lib Dems have been fantastic so far. Great councillors, great individuals, solid questions, but we are tending to have a lot of repetition, and I know that that's a tiny complaint. But I do have a great belief that as a grouping, we've got a great group of councillors, generally speaking, and the Lib Dems are leading the way on that. So yeah, just repetition, because some of our meetings, especially planning meetings, council meetings, we could be an hour earlier out the door and get a very valid quality and high level of quality of both decision making and perception by the general public.
Oh, thanks, Councillor Da Costa. So I do speak to people behind the scenes. If I do think there are particular culprits. But again, I think it's for all the chairs of all the panels to sort of remind people not to be repetitive, not to make the same points again and again. I think we've got some excellent chairs, though, I have to say. But maybe that's just something maybe we could look at training for chairs and maybe just reminding chairs to just mention that at the start of the meeting, and to maybe interject if there is a lot of repetition, because I agree sometimes the meetings can go on for a bit longer, and councillors have jobs as well, and having meetings late into the evening it can be hard, and when you're trying to make correct, lawful decisions. But again, it's a job for me. As I said, I do speak to people behind the scenes, and I also think, again, it's one for group leaders to have a discussion with their own councillors if there are specific culprits, maybe to just have a chat. Obviously, everybody wants to have their say in a meeting, and it is a public forum. But I agree. There's a time and a place sometimes.
Gertch.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. Lane, just coming back on that point there, I just got a suggestion. At the beginning of the meetings, when the chairs provided a script by the council to read out, and it says, I can eject anyone from the meeting, and don't speak unless I should speak, and blah blah blah. But in that we can maybe have a paragraph in there or a line in there to talk about the repetition in the meeting and talk about the time. I think that's a good point you've made there, because some of the meetings they do go on a long time, and the debate's good, and it's good to keep it a bit more short, a bit more concise. So it just keeps people sort of perked up and engaged throughout. But yeah, may just a suggestion, maybe change that script.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. I think that's a good idea. Obviously, we'd need to look at that on a panel by panel basis, but if I'm correct in thinking, Oren will probably know the answers, I think we have that. I know at full council, the mayor will often mention that at the start of the meeting.
It's sort of different chair on chair. Some chairs would rather not sort of say lots of stuff and just get into the meeting. Some people like to. But I think counselling is certainly a good idea. We have sort of tried it before in the past, I must say, but we also got some feedback about, but we don't want to sort of limit the debate, and we want to say what we want to say, because it might be a slight different point. But if the chair is happy, and that's a suggestion from you guys, then it's something we can certainly look at.
Yeah, it's certainly
absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, no more.
You froze there, Councillor Werner.
Oh, right.
I think you said no more hands. There are no more hands.
There are no more hands. So can we approve the paper? Is that what you want us to do on? Excellent. Everyone in favour of to note the paper. Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.